First meeting that we have is Metro Vancouver Regional District Parks, and we do have a replacement for page E 1.1, page 12. It was a chart, and the charts in option number 3, second row down, had 1.8 million. It's actually 2.2 million. And I think we have that on table so that you don't have to necessarily find it, but that was the change there. We also have 2 delegations, the Blackberry Artist Society and Robert Simonson. They came in before the deadline, but after the agenda was published, so they are in proper process. So with that, can someone please move the agenda? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have minutes from February 24th. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, we have 2 delegations. First, we have Allison White from the Blackberry Artist Society. Welcome. I'll remind our board and the delegations that you have 5 minutes to present your delegation, and if there are any questions afterwards, we will funnel them to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Belcarra South Cottages. My name is Allison White, this is Jane Appleby, and we're members of the Passionate Outdoor Painters. We're a group of Lower Mainland artists who paint outdoors. We're plein air artists. Along with some other artists, we were invited by the residents of Belcarra South to paint the cottages back in 2014 and 2015. We arrived by car, by kayak, and we set up in the woods, on the beaches, in the front yards, and the backyards of the cottages. We painted porches, front doors, back doors, dog doors, cottages, gardens, outhouses, wagons with flowers. The residents encouraged us to walk through, set up our easels, and paint. The diversity of the cabins has been captured by our members in ways as diverse as the artists themselves. The rustic charm of the cottages inspired our creativity. You can see all the different cottages up on the screen. We are proud of capturing their uniqueness and sharing it with the public at the Port Moody Library, the Port Moody Arts Center, at a local coffee shop, and at the annual Port Moody Art Show, always to very enthusiastic response. The rustic, historic nature of the cottages is an inspiration to artists from Port Moody and writers who have produced books. And this is in the City of the Arts and beyond. Retaining the cottages and perhaps using one for a seasonal artist in residence would broaden the appeal of the park to visitors. The historical, cultural, and artistic appeal of the cottages is a significant contribution to our community and generations to follow. That here is an opportunity to offer something unique in a park setting. Thank you very much. Here are some more of our paintings, fronts of the cottages, the porches. These are all done plein air, which means painted outside. This is in the library. We had a show. This is Michael Klutner, which many of you may know. This is the Bowl House, a very ancient house in Port Moody. thank you very much for allowing us to show our work.
That's great. How long did it take you to paint all of those? Because when you look at the video, it's like you just showed up one afternoon
I
and
know.
it was all done, but I suspect it took a little longer than that.
Well, actually, a lot of them were really painted right on site, weren't they, Jane?
Within an hour, but.
Really?
Yes, that's what plein air painters try to capture, is the moment of the place, and that's why the actual place in its setting means so much, because it actually is, in a way, like a living art form for artists to be inspired by. So it's immediate, but we went there several times, different ways.
Well, many, many times, actually, yeah.
I guess someone that can do good stick figures, that's very impressive. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? I don't see any, so thank you so much for coming forward and presenting
Yes,
that.
thank you very much.
Next, we have Robert Simonson. And Robert is the past president of the Port Moody Heritage Society. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair and Board. My name is Robert Simons. I am the past chair of the Port Moody Heritage Society, and I'm here to speak to your agenda item, which is the discussion regarding the plans that you have with respect to the Belcarra cottages and the bowl house in your park called Belcarra Park. We see in these particular cottages and the bowl house a very significant opportunity that possibly is being missed with respect to the retention of a significant heritage value within the Metro Vancouver area. The area that developed around Burrard Inlet, of course, goes through many stages, and of course we're seeing a lot of different stages as it's being evolved. But there's certain areas that need to have a representation as to what the earliest stages of some of our habitation was within the area. And what you have within Belcarra Park is the last remaining area that shows the early summer settlements that existed around the Burrard Inlet area. You have it in public land. If this was in private land, you'd have very difficult issues in trying to retain it as a heritage park within a park. But because you have been able to acquire some of these properties and put it into the Belcarra Park precinct, you have the ability, you yourselves along with the City of Port Moody and the Village of Belcarra, to create a very unique heritage park within a park. Port Moody has taken some significant steps with respect to the protection of the cottages within their area, along with the bowl house, by putting them into a heritage bylaw, which I know has been some point of discussion at this particular board. And I think the Belcarra area represents a unique opportunity for Metro Vancouver to work with the city, along with the Village of Belcarra, to create that unique heritage, that resource that really is something that's tactile, that we can keep for our generations. We can take pictures. You've seen some beautiful images put up here earlier with respect to the paintings of it, but you want to have a tactile representation of what that heritage was. So I ask you seriously to consider the motion you're looking at today and to turn it back for further consideration, because I do believe there's greater opportunity to work within the areas that you have, the capabilities that you have, to really create a unique essence within Belcarra Park that really will represent something that is of a long time value for your communities, for all communities, and for visitors that come to that park. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to speak to you, and hopefully our thoughts and the thoughts of many residents within Port Moody and also within Metro Vancouver will guide you in your considerations of the motion we'll be considering later this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions? Director Fox, you have a question, or are you getting ready for the next one? Okay. Director Fox?
Thank you, and thank you very much for coming today. The cabins under consideration as part of what I would presume is the Port Moody Heritage Bylaw. Can you just tell us which ones would not, in your opinion, your learned opinion, be, how would I phrase this, not necessary to keep, but the least valued to keep?
You know, the unfortunate situation with the cabins is that because of the lack of decision over the last number of years, you know, a number of them have sort of, there's different levels of maintenance that's been able to be undertaken with them with respect to the situations with the tenants and the opportunity to actually do repair and maintenance on them. I wouldn't want to sort of default anyone at this point as a cabin not to be retained. I believe that there's one that has been damaged recently and probably is currently unoccupied. We don't know the state of that particular cabin personally. I would certainly like to see as much retained as possible within that heritage park concept. I know that particularly the heritage bylaw in Port Moody has protected all of the cabins at this point. I know that there is no heritage protection currently on the cabin that's in Balcarra, which is unfortunate, but I do believe that all of them need to be looked at very seriously. Yes, you may not be able to keep all of them, okay? But I believe all need to be looked at very closely to see what really are the ones to keep as we move forward. Does that help with your understanding?
Yeah, and of particular, is one more, I'm thinking of the Bowl House here. Is that of particular interest because of the heritage that it entails?
Well, the Bowl House actually is the anchor when you really look at that whole heritage precinct area. So, the Bowl House was that original creation that sort of created the opportunity for then the cottages to sort of be evolved around it. So, the Bowl House certainly is the anchor of what would be that heritage park within a park. And what that could be used for, it has great opportunity, I believe, to be used as a facility that would be for engaging community residents in discussions, could be a place for artists to work within, could be even an off-site meeting place within the park that is available for odd events. Okay.
Okay.
And one other item too, and just to go to what has happened over time, because there has not been definitive action on it, certain of the historical aspects that sort of represent the Bowl House and the cabins, cottages, unfortunately have been moved. And the longer you wait on heritage items, the greater challenge it is to sort of protect and preserve them. And over the last 30 years, really within our Metro Vancouver area, I think we've come to appreciate the fact that heritage is pretty important. The tactile elements of heritage is pretty important. 30 years ago, we didn't necessarily have that type of appreciation, but now each of you in your respective communities deal with this question all the time, that heritage is important to keep, and you do find ways to try to preserve and protect those tactile elements of heritage, even when you're going through development proposals on private property, as well as issues related to public property.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Villeneuve?
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, as a member of the Heritage Society, I know in our city we have a society, that Heritage Society, that partners with the city and raises funds to help support our museum and people's access to the museum and some capital projects. So is there anything in your area that's doing something similar, so there would be some kind of partnership for upkeep and capital repair, et cetera, for the cottages?
I believe there is. So for those that you don't appreciate, the Heritage Society in Port Moody actually owns and operates the Port Moody Museum. So we are an operating entity as well as a society of interest for advocacy for heritage preservation. If there was the opportunity presented, I'm sure the Heritage Society would be prepared to work with the public entities, the cities, Metro, to try to find ways to continue to use those facilities. And so there definitely is that willingness to work on it, and that's probably why you're seeing me here today, is to ensure that there's a way that those particular cottages in the Bowl House can be used at some point going forward.
So you actually raised the money for the operating costs of the museum in the city?
Yes, we have. We have the opportunity to work with the City of Port Moody, of course, to seek certain funds for our operations, but we do a fair amount of grant requests that basically include the provincial gaming, federal grants that help us with certain capital aspects and operational aspects. So, we are a nonprofit organization. So nonprofit organizations seek any opportunity they can to find support for the operations we undertake.
Okay, thank you.
Director Hodge?
Yes, thank you. You have a number of buildings in Port Moody that are of heritage age and significance. What is the society doing in other areas to protect some of these buildings, and how do you rate these in relation to some of the other ones, such as the Ioko town site and some of the other heritage assets in the city? How do you rate these cottages in relationship to the other assets in the city?
Well, they all have different elements of heritage, as you can appreciate. We have been advocacies for the Ioko town site and redevelopment work that's being anticipated on that site. It represents a very specific industrial history for Port Moody and a town site setting. So there is some unique characteristics around that we would be advocating for, that in any type of plans around IOCO, we would be looking for it to be representative of the town site setting that existed there. There are character homes throughout Port Moody that, we have commented on that, should be retained. And to the benefit of the community, I think our city council has done well in working with developers to try to ensure that some of those heritage homes, sometimes they're called character because heritage character, it depends, are being preserved within our community, and we do support and advocate that. As I see the cabins and the cottages and the bowl house, I do see that as another unique type of heritage characteristic within the Port Moody area that has that unique flavor. How could I rate one against the other? They each have their individual aspect of heritage that you want to retain. And I wouldn't want to sort of say one is better than the other. I just think they have unique heritage characteristics that you have to consider when you're looking at preserving and protecting heritage.
And there has been public consultation on the park and on the cottages. And one of the things that I have yet to see is suggestions on what they could be used for in terms of public use. So just, do you have any suggestions? I mean, we've heard an artist in residency one, but there's 6 of them, and that's always the challenge when preserving heritage buildings within a city is what do you put them? There's only so many senior centers that you need, or so many art centers that you need. What would your vision be? What could these buildings be used for?
Well, there's certainly an artist in residence opportunity exists, I think, in certain cases, and we've seen it in other heritage type parks where you actually create I won't say demonstration, but they're sort of depictive examples of what the cottage use was used for, and they're basically kept in some type of characteristic style for visitors to see and use. I believe there's opportunities for not just artists in residence, but cultural people in residence to basically, use those cabins for their creative activities. And as I say, from the bowl house perspective, the size of that presents an opportunity to use it for other types of public events that could be carried around that particular area. But again, it's the essence of creating that park. And once you sort of say you're going to have that heritage park within a park, then I think your mind can sort of expand as to what potential opportunities exist. It's not certainly as grand as other heritage parks, but there are great examples of where communities have established heritage representations of community life at a certain time that sort of provides that snapshot that you then protect and preserve over time, so that there's that tactile capability to keep that history available for not only ourselves but our future generations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Steves?
Yeah, I just have a similar question. We've got a Terranova Rural Park in Richmond has a heritage area, and when we acquired the land for the park, we ended up with a half a dozen buildings that had originally been cannery buildings for the Terranova Cannery. One was in rough shape, we demolished it. One is still sitting vacant, but we have been restoring the buildings. My question to you is because we've got a very large population core, we have no trouble finding uses for it. The most successful building is being used for a child care center where they're teaching children how to grow gardens, which is quite amazing, and it's incredible. But I'm not sure if you've got the population density nearby to warrant that type of activity.
I think there is, and I'm familiar with some of the work that Richmond has done, and I congratulate Richmond on what they've done with that particular heritage area. I think the opportunity, I know that we do have summer camp activities that happen within Belcarra Park, so there's opportunity. I think the summer camp could be expanded to possibly use those facilities. Not to say that you couldn't create some type of heritage garden area within the Heritage Park area. I know one of the items we've attempted to do at the Port Moody Station Museum is to create a heritage garden. But because you want to, again, it's another tactile capability to show ourselves and our future generations, what was life like, and also to experience that. I think in the case of heritage gardens, that really is sort of pretty positive activity as we're considering all sorts of items around community gardens today. So, there is, the mind can expand a lot with respect to how you can use these buildings, and I appreciate your comment that they have to be looked at relative to, potentially what all uses could be made of them.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Steves. And Richard, I don't see anybody else, so thanks for coming out this morning and sharing your thoughts from the heritage side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, moving on, we have a consent agenda in front of us. Would anybody like to remove anything out of the consent agenda? Or Director Clay? 1.1. Anybody else? Seeing none, move the last item and only item in consent agenda. Moved and seconded. Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, over to you, Director Clay. Do you want to move the resolution, or should I try to get someone else to move it first? Well, you have the floor. You can move an alternate one if you want to. I just like to have a resolution on the floor before we start going. Director
Somebody
Clay.
keeps yelling, I'll move it, but I'd like, since I do have the floor, I would like to suggest an alternate resolution that the Parks Committee report be referred to the City of Port Moody and the City of Belcarra to work with Metro Vancouver on alternatives and/or alternate uses of the cabin before any plan is moved forward, and also to consult on the general moving forward with public use of Belcarra South report. And since it's seconded, I'll just speak briefly to it, Mr. Chair. I hope, because as much as I'd like to speak longer to it, I don't believe that Metro Vancouver as a body should knowingly enter into any resolutions that they know are breaking the law. And the report acknowledges that none of the 4 recommendations that were in front of the Parks Committee are compliant with the bylaw in Port Moody, which is the law. And I think it would be irresponsible for us to move that recommendation forward knowing that that's the case. But also that, as was just noted, that, you know, part of the historical relevance of this site for the city is the sense of place, and the sense that these buildings belong in that place. Sorry.
Well, since you're talking about this organization breaking the law, I'm suggesting that we should go into closed to have that discussion.
I don't want to dwell on it, but I just, the recommendation's already been put in front of us with a report that says none of these 4 items are compliant.
Fair enough, and I don't want to stop a conversation about that. I just don't know if you, when you go into that realm, if that's an open conversation or a closed conversation.
My intent isn't to go any further into it, and I'm only mentioning it because the report says that all 4 of the recommendations are non-compliant with the law. So I didn't break that, the report did. So if you want to move it in camera, that's, I guess, at your call, but.
Yeah, and I'm just, if it furthered down that path of this conversation.
I'm not going any further down that path, but again, I just think it's a bad idea. But the point of the historical value goes far beyond what one of the individual or the group of cabins suggests, but it's the sense of place, the sense of history that attaches those buildings with that place and its historic relevance in our past in Port Moody. And I would hope that the board would at least look deeper into this for options. And I think that if we went into anybody else's community and suggested that we would find a piece of your local history and just demolish it because it had a cost attached to it or whatever, that we would want everybody to know that we'd looked at every option before we moved down that route. We've been very careful as a city not to get involved in the tenancy argument, because that's something between Metro Vancouver and the contract that they have with their tenants. But, you know, as far as the historical value, and the last we heard from Metro Vancouver was a letter putting us on notice, again, as mentioned in the report, that there may be cost implications of our heritage preservation bylaw, which we're fine with, and we would look forward to furthering that discussion, but that's the last we heard. We've never had a further discussion. This went to the Parks Committee without any consultation with Port Moody. This whole report hasn't been consulted with Port Moody. There's things in the report about 50 to 75 parking spaces that we don't know where they would exist. I've checked with our staff that the conversations that they've had haven't been about that in particular. And we don't know where those details lie. And it may be that there is, you know, more to this that we don't know, that we might even be accepting of, but until we've had that conversation, I don't think that it's fair to put us behind that conversation.
All right, thank you for your comments. Any other speakers on referral back to Port Moody and Belcarra Village? So, Director Corrigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that for those who are relatively new to the board, is that this issue has been going on for a number of years, and there was a earlier decision made by the board under some considerable pressure from Port Moody and from other interests in regard to the Belcarra Park properties. And a decision was made that the park for regional use and the passive use that is often a big part of our park sphere was the one that was chosen to move forward. This was not moving forward with any heritage designation on the property, and in fact the heritage designation was made after we had moved to deal with the tenancies and to utilize Belcarra Park in the same way that we use all of the other parks within the region. Unfortunately, at the point that we had made the decision, that's when Port Moody decided that they valued the heritage aspect and brought in a heritage preservation bylaw, which obstructed the ability for us to proceed with our plans and also obstructed our ability to deal with the evictions that were necessary to be able to go forward with the Belcarra regional plans. We all know that we have gone through important discussions about how we're going to utilize our parks and the purpose that we're acquiring these parks for. And the primary purpose to acquire these parks is to give a broad public access to passive lands that reflect our ecological heritage. And we have been very determined to make those things happen. If you look, the report that was just passed in the consent agenda was dealing with the house at Burnaby Lake Regional Park. We are presently, we've just approved a 5-year lease at $10 in order to deal with the fact that we could find no uses for that heritage building over the course of time. Even in a city as populous as Burnaby, there weren't many opportunities to do so. The other thing, being a city that has protected heritage sites for a significant period of time, including Burnaby Village Museum, there are real costs to protecting heritage. And when you make a heritage designation bylaw, you owe it to the party that you in fact have made the designation on to provide the funds to be able to maintain the heritage site or to reach an agreement with the party in which you are going to contribute to the heritage designation, and that eventually will have to be something that's done. We have gone on and examined every possibility, gone through every legal loophole, and have spent considerable time to deal with this, and I find it very surprising that at this stage, at the last moment, the 11th hour, suddenly Port Moody is asking to come in and be part of the process. They've had every opportunity to provide a positive input to this process over a protracted period of time. I am personally tired of dealing with this issue. It's important that we move ahead, and I urge the board to vote against this resolution and to approve the very difficult decision that's been made by our Parks Committee to come to a conclusion, and I support the recommendation that the Parks Committee has made. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your comments. Director Hodge?
Yes, similar comments. I think that one of the challenges that we have, certainly within Metro Parks, is that we have over 75 buildings on our properties, and many of them do have significant heritage value, and we just don't have the funds right now to repair, maintain those buildings, or in some cases have uses for those buildings. Now I recognize that on the parks plan is to do some work on evaluating and doing work with heritage in the future, but these buildings, as Director Corrigan has mentioned, there was a plan in place for this property. This is a last minute thing that's come forward, and I recognize that Port Moody does have an interest in these properties, and I would certainly entertain an amendment to recommendation B, and the last line which says forward the public use of Belcarra South to the City of Port Moody and Village of Belcarra for further discussions or for further consultation as opposed to comment, because I think that we do need to work with the local municipalities there to see what we can do to find possibly potential uses and get their suggestions on how we can utilize these buildings. But there was an extensive public consultation that took place this summer with the public, and it was clear that the public wants to see more use of these spaces for public use, and I think we have to try to figure out a way that we can accommodate both interests here.
Thank you for your comments. Director Dhaliwal.
Thank you, Chair Moore. As a member of the committee, I also like to say a couple of things. The committee has been at it for many, many years just trying to find some solution to it so that portion of the park becomes public access, unrestricted access to the public who go there. And that has been the major concern for the committee. It wasn't a whole lot of a issue about preserving or not preserving those buildings, but the big thing for us was to make sure that the public, when they go to visit that park, they're able to access the entire park. And that continues to be an issue because the residents of those cottages have been not as accommodating to that. In fact, there are signs there, if there happens to be different times of the tide, you cannot go through that part of the park because you are considered kind of stranded because the water has come in. Those kind of things aren't really what we would think is a free and open access to public at any time. So the committee took its time. It took years to get to a point where we said, look, we have to move. And then suddenly when we were proceeding with that one and we found that City of Port Moody was now designating a heritage designation to this, that seems to have come without a whole lot of consultation with us at the time. You would have thought that people who have the park, who own the park, would have been involved in a lot of discussion that which buildings were able to be saved, which buildings should have been saved. At least the committee did not get to do that discussion at all. What seems to be after the fact that suddenly these are heritage buildings. That aside, that's I believe our local government, our people to staff to find out whether they were indeed have the heritage value and that or not. There continues to be a discussion on that. I've seen those ones. I don't believe that generally the value you will attach to a heritage building has some characteristic to it, some which is different than which can be demonstrated clearly. That hasn't been done very successfully to us anyway, to the committee. The committee wholeheartedly supported the removal of those cabins and made those recommendations to the board, and the board in their decisions also proceeded to go. So this option, now that has been put because Port Moody has created a barrier. I would like to use that word in terms of really developing that park is now at a point where, because it's a designation, we need to deal with it. This recommendation from the committee clearly states that we got to work with Port Moody on this one because we have, obviously there's designation and we need to consider which one of them can be kept. If one in this recommendation, there's a couple of buildings being preserved. One is of course, the most important one that we all felt that has some value to it. That's the Bowl House, and another cabin could be preserved. That's the most prudent decision, I believe, is in front of the board to proceed, so we can meet some need for the heritage preservation. We can continue to see how we can display the way things were and how the community feels, but not the way currently it exists now. So I'm going to support what the committee's recommendation was. I believe even with that, the idea would have been, ideal solution would have been for us, from our perspective, was to remove all of them. And that's one, and that's the option 4. But we felt that perhaps in order to move forward, let's make some concession to the wishes of City of Port Moody, and hopefully Port Moody would come forward. As Director Corrigan has said, you just don't designate something without making a commitment from the community. If the community really wishes to think some of them is kept, there ought to be, say, something on the table to say, when we are the one, we feel that this is a designated property, and here's how we're going to support that. And all local governments do when they make a concession or designation, they are prepared to make such concessions. I think this is time to talk about those things. So I support what the committee recommended.
Thank you for your comments. Director Steves.
Thank you. I'm no longer on the Parks Committee, but when I was very supportive of retaining these buildings. long before actually Port Moody even put them on the heritage list. We saw them as heritage buildings. We had clusters of this type of housing throughout the region for decades. I remember as a kid going across the Ladner Ferry to Beach Grove, where friends of ours had cabins at near Boundary Bay. This is the last cluster, and I think it certainly does have heritage significance, and that's why Port Moody put them on the list. When we put a private property on the list, we don't say we're going to give you money to fix it up. It's the responsibility of the owners to maintain them. So I don't know why we're arguing that Port Moody should be putting the money up front. This is something that they're concerned about as well as a few of us through the rest of the region. And I think it's their right to put them on their heritage list, and they've done so. I think it's important that we adhere to the motion made by Port Moody and pass it on to them to help come up with a solution. When we acquired the Terra Nova lands, we didn't know what we were going to do with all the houses that we had acquired with it. But we have, as mentioned, we've got a daycare center which grows gardens and teaches kids agriculture. We've got community groups. We even actually recently built a barn for one of the groups on our site. It cost, I think, it's $40,000, $50,000 in addition to go along with one of the buildings that they were using for the Food Security Society. So we found lots of uses, and for our heritage buildings, as I said, we've got one more to restore. We haven't done yet. We haven't looked into the use for it yet. But the uses are out there, and as we developed our Terra Nova area, we found all kinds of people willing to come and help operate and run them and look after them. So I just don't see this as a problem. I think this makes our parks much livelier when you've got these activities on and different societies and groups operating them. Because that's what we're doing in Richmond, and our Terra Nova Rural Park is vibrant.
Thank you for your comments. I do have a little bit of a speakers left here, and I'm going to remind everybody that we're speaking to referral. We're not speaking to the main motion about whether we keep them or how many or which ones or their value or that sort of thing. We're only speaking to whether this should be referred to Port Moody and Belcarra or not. Thanks. Director Reimer.
Thank you, Chairperson. I had a question, and then it may be followed by comment. So the question was, as I had read, and I appreciate we're not speaking to the main report, but I'm trying to understand the difference between the referral motion and motion B from the main report, which sound quite a bit similar to me.
Yes, and then in the process of this, if we were to pass any of the options prior, the options 1 through 4, the next step would be to go to Port Moody and work with them on what the options were, whether that was option 4, which is demolish because you have to get demolition permits and a whole bunch of other things, or it's keeping them all or keeping some variation. So the next natural step for us in this process is to go to Port Moody.
Okay.
With direction from the board.
Right. Okay. So to that end, then I take Director Corrigan's points. It doesn't sound like this will be the end of it. However, regardless of what course of action we take, but I feel quite strongly that the Park Committee has done quite a lot of work, and it's time for the board to endorse that work, while still not foreclosing on the option to go to Port Moody. I just don't want to jump past the park's work, so I'll be voting against referral and in favor of the recommendation.
Thank you for your comments. Director Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask through yourself, from staff, when did we first have this brought before the board or the Parks Committee? How long has this been in the discussion process?
Rita? I'm going to say 6 years ago.
Through the chair, we're trying to remember exactly. It's been several years, maybe 2015, 2013. It says in the report. I was flipping through the report. 2013.
Thank you, Chair. It would seem to me that we've even changed boards in that period of time, and it's time to make a decision. These buildings have been there for a long time, yes. They are classified by some as heritage. In some sectors, anything newer than 100 years is really not heritage. However, having said that, I really think that we have had an opportunity. Port Moody has had all the opportunity in the world in 4 years to come forward and make a reasonable offer. This is regional money. You know, my people in Delta are helping pay for whatever's going to go on here, just like people in Port Moody are helping pay for whatever's going on in Delta. But I really think it's of concern to all of us that this is not Port Moody's property. And if they want these cabins, maybe they should move them and take them into the town or another area that they have in another park. It wouldn't be quite the same because it's not on the water. But if the buildings are that important, maybe they should be just moving them. And I think it's time for us to be very upfront about this. This board keep going round and round in circles, not wanting to hurt anybody's feelings and not wanting to hurt any, particular community. There's a lot of money sitting here. We're talking about, oh, am I off the topic?
No, not at all.
Okay. It's something I think we really do have to make a decision on, and I cannot see any use in referring this back, Chair, so I will not be in support of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Director Long.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I never really see a disadvantage to referring something back if there's more discussion to be had, and obviously there is quite a bit of discussion happening right now. There are options being presented, and there's other things to consider besides just physical assets. There's many other things at play here. So I would support the motion. I think any member of this board, any member of municipality or district, should be able to exercise its option to have more discussion before a decision is made. I would have to say, as a member of the Parks Committee, this wasn't a very easy decision, and it was very close actually between option 1 and option 2 and other options. So there wasn't a degree of tremendous certainty from the Parks Committee. In many ways, I felt that we were in a bad position because we were trying to, we're tasked, the Parks Committee is tasked to do things in parks, not to get involved with litigation and some of these historic aspects. And I might also add that there are historic aspects in all of our parks which we need to probably pay more attention to. So there's a lesson here to be learned for sure. But referring back to one of our members for more discussion before decisions made, I think is a wise thing to do. And I don't see any harm in that at all, so I'd be supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Director Smith.
Mr. Chairman, just a procedural point. We're now 45 minutes into this, and I have to admit I've never been to Belcarra, let alone Belcarra Park, so I don't know how I could comment intelligently on the issue. But the point is that we have a park staff and a parks committee charged with the responsibility of looking after our public park assets. And if they're not capable or competent of doing the job, then changes should obviously be made. But assuming they are, then I don't understand why we just are not accepting the recommendation of people whose job it is to make sure that the proper usage of our parks takes place.
Thank you for your comments. Director Steele.
Thank you very much. This was a topic of great importance when I was on the Parks Board, which is a long time ago now, probably the 2013 version. And I won't support the referral. I think it is time for a decision to be made. I think it's been discussed and discussed and discussed and discussed. And so I have to support the majority of the board decision anyway, because I think they probably have heard it all, have everybody's best interests at heart, and it's just delaying it just one bit more. So I will not be supporting the referral.
Thank you for your comments. Director Stevenson.
Ditto. I'm an old park board member myself, remember the discussions very well, remember the angst we went through, and I can hear that the park board today is also going through that same angst, but I will not support referral.
Thank you for your comments. Director Clay, you have something new?
It's a theme of something new. Just pointing out that, there's all this talk about how there's been a lot of discussion. I'm asking for this to come back to the city because we haven't been formally involved in this discussion. We brought the heritage preservation bylaw in when the application was made for destruction of the cabins. That's natural progression. We were discussing it before that with Metro, and we said we weren't in favor of it. Metro went ahead with a demolition permit, so we moved to protect them. That's natural progression of what we do. The heritage preservation bylaw provisions exist for a reason, and it's for this reason. It's for us to protect, whether it's private property or public property or whatever, to protect these heritage assets. That's why this exists under the law. So we're asking for that consultation with this in mind, because those discussions that everybody's had, they've had them at the Parks Committee at 4330 Kingsway, and not with the city of Port Moody, not with the village of Belcarra. We've been, for the most part, left out of those conversations. So while the Parks Committee is making these decisions and looking at 4 different options, we've never been presented those options. We were eagerly awaiting a furtherance of a conversation after Metro put us on notice about trying to do something to take ownership or to do something else. We haven't had those conversations, so all we're asking is for the opportunity to move that conversation ahead, which and again, this in no way hampers the tenancy arrangement that Metro has, but the tenancy arrangement is what actually has been hampering everything else, because we can't move forward with any other planning as long as those buildings have a current use, which is Metro's issue to resolve, and we've been waiting for that one to be resolved so that we could move those conversations forward. So, again, all we're asking for, and there's nothing in the motion as written that says that there's any consultation with Port Moody or Belcarra. It says that it would be sent to us for comments. And what we're asking for is not just that it be sent to us for comments, but before the board endorses that option, that conversation comes back to the city so that we can have that conversation.
Thank you. Vice Chair Louis?
Just for historical purposes, the board had already made a decision for demolition. That was the board position that we, and a previous iteration of this board had taken. And Director Clay is correct that the iteration of activities after that was a heritage designation. The question that's before us today is whether or not, well, the referral motion is for further consultation, but the question is, what are we consulting on? And the proposition from the Park Committee is that we give clarity for that conversation to occur. And so let's make a decision, have that conversation, get those comments from Port Moody, because we've already changed our mind once, right? Because remember, we said we're demolishing these things way back in 2013. And so let's give the clarity. I'm going to vote against referral. Let's give the clarity for staff, and let's see where that conversation leads to.
Okay, Director Long, something new, and then I'm going to the question. On referral,
Well, okay.
on referral, please.
Because what I just heard is that from the previous speakers, we need, some more consultation would be quite handy in this option. And I don't think option 1 or option 2 was very clearly decided upon by the Parks Committee. So there is more discussion. And there's a huge difference between option 1 and option 2. Okay. Not a lot of money, but there's difference in terms of heritage preservation. So more discussion is required, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, okay, I won't comment on that. All right, we're going to call the question on referral. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. Would someone like to move a motion now? Or actually, you moved referral, wasn't it? You're moving what's presented in front of us? Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded? Director Long.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. I mean, I would prefer to move option 2, but whatever option we're going to adopt here, we do need to have a consultation with Port Moody, and it was pointed out earlier by...
Sorry, can I just clarify? It is option 2 that was moved.
Yeah, well, I would prefer option 1, actually.
Okay.
But anyway...
Sorry, you had said you'd preferred option 2, so I was just making sure.
Well, option 2 is... my second option would be to support option 1. But anyway, so can we also put in here as an amendment that consultation will be happening with Port Moody, not that we're just going to send them advice that this is what we've chosen to do. I thought that's what I heard in the conversations. Yeah, perhaps I could make an amendment that we remove the word comments and rather put the word consultation.
Okay, so Director Long is in item 1.1B, the second to last word before and, is asking that we amend the word comments to consultation. And there's a seconder for that. So on the amended motion, are there any speakers? Director Corrigan?
So we all know that there are definitions to the word consultation as opposed to the word comment. After having just lost the referral motion by a significant majority, I find it just mischievous to continue to try to oppose the will of the board in regard to the choice that we've made. It was quite clear from the discussion that we were supporting what the recommendations were from the Parks Committee. That included, after their analysis, requiring comment from Port Moody. And I think that just attempting now to obstruct, we spent over an hour on this item now. You know, it's not fair to the rest of the meeting that very few people have decided they want to make a political issue out of this and are doing everything they can to obstruct the orderly conduct of the business. So I'm not supporting the amendment.
Thank you. Director Jackson?
Thank you. I just want clarity as to what we're doing if the motion does pass, Chair. We are endorsing option 2, which retains the house and cabin is 6. And now I'm hearing that we're going to go back to Port Moody and Belcarra for what reason? I mean, is that going to now go to them and then come back to us again for reconsideration? I'm just not quite sure about the second part of the action. Perhaps I misunderstand.
No, I don't think you do. I think if we were to fully go down that path, we should go into closed. And I'm okay to do that. I'm just suggesting that that would be the appropriate path for this board, is to go to move into a closed portion to fully explore that question.
Could we move ahead with this, and then could I inquire under close exactly what the concerns are that would require us under close?
Yep, for sure.
Right, if that's all right, sir.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks. Director Villeneuve?
Thank you. I just, we were just a bit confused, I guess, because the report that we had on March 1st said option 1, and then on the back side, I guess now it's option 2. So we were all looking for where the option 2 came from, the way it was set up in our book. So I think it's clarified, but I just too wanted clarification on the consultation with Port Moody and what that means. If they have a major change to come back, whether that's something we're going to be dealing with or whether it's just from comments on.
So, yeah, on the first part, to clarify,
Yes.
the staff report to the Parks Committee
Yes.
was for option 1.
Okay.
But the Parks Committee endorsed option 2.
Okay.
So just on page 8 of the Regional Parks Committee, that's the Parks agenda. On page 7, ahead of it, where it's underlined, that's
Yes.
the recommendation that was approved. So that's why the confusion.
We've flipped back and seen that now,
Yeah.
so that's
Okay.
what was confusing at first. So basically, comments mean they're going to comment on our decision on option 1 when we send it to the city. Is that correct?
Yep, I think it's a nuance between comment and consult.
Okay, thank you.
Director Clay.
Mr. Chair, I won't bog down in the commentary that Director Long is entitled to make a motion protecting his rights, whether he's in the minority or the majority. Of course, we're open to debate here, and I hope that that would always be true. And what was made very clear, even in the comments of the people who said they weren't supporting the motion that I had put forward, they did believe that this motion, and as you explained to this body, this motion does include consultation with Port Moody. You made that very clear, that anything we do has to go back for consultation with Port Moody. So changing that wording, to me, is completely inoffensive, but does send a clearer indication than just saying we're sending it to comment. So there, we were told that this will go for further discussion, and that's what I'm hopeful that this will do. And I think that Director Long's clarification of the language only reinforces that, and I don't know why we wouldn't adopt that.
Thank you for your comments. Director Baldwin?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That actually segues nicely into what I was going to say, which was that if you're going to consult with somebody, it means you haven't really made a decision on it yet, that you're open to modifying your decision. And whereas if you're going to comment on it, that provides some amplification perhaps, but the decision is clearly made. So if we go for the consultation route, then we haven't made a decision. The matter is still open. We're still available for delegations. We're still available for appeals from Port Moody, whatnot. In the meantime, the buildings will remain locked up, perhaps even have to have construction fencing around them because they're possibly not safe for public use and entry. So I don't think we're doing ourselves any favor by dragging this out any longer, and I would certainly concur with the need for a decision and to ask for comment, but not ask for consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Jordan?
I agree wholeheartedly with Director Baldwin. That's why I pushed my speak button. If there's no difference between the words comment and consult, then why are we considering an amendment? There is a big difference. And so I support the report as it is with the words comment in it. We can all look to First Nations and ask them what it means to consult and how far up the line of the courts you would have to go over that. So as Director Baldwin said, consult and comment are two completely different concepts, and I support what's in the report as it is.
Thank you for your comments. Vice Chair Louis?
Mr. Chair, I'm loath to do this, but I think it's necessary. Given the conversation in regards to consultation and comments, and the prospect that we are entering into a type of discussion negotiations that it's prudent for us to move in camera, have a fuller understanding of what the implications of this recommendation is. From my listening to the comments, I'm not sure that there's the clarity that's necessary on making this decision and then allowing for further consultation with Port Moody after making this decision. So, Mr. Chair, I move that we move in camera for the remainder of this discussion.
So you're moving the motion to go into closed under 91I for
Correct.
legal?
Yes.
Is there a seconder? Do I need a seconder? Seconder? I won't take questions on this. All in favor? Opposed? The motion passes, so we are going to go into closed. Word comment in item 1.1B with the word consultation. Are there any last speakers? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion fails. We're back to the main motion. Are there any last speakers to the main motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? You want to record it? If you want to record it, keep your hands up. I'll tell you when you can put them down. Could be hours. Are we good? All right. The motion passes. Thanks. All right. Where am I? Resolution to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.